Freedom's Cause, Vignette 4, titled Ancient Slavery. Today, via what the eye can see and the ear can hear, it is recognized the doctrine of ancient slavery stands in opposition to America's Declaration of Independence. What is not recognized is how open marriages are the living embodiment of said doctrine. Ancient slavery took hold within a society as people learned via owning slaves they could garner great wealth. But when people looked to acquire slaves, the dictates of their conscience pricked them, telling them their looking to suppress the rights of others is morally wrong. This pricking of their conscience functioned as a mild chastisement designed to awaken them to their incorrect thought process. As via said pricking, they were being gently but firmly counseled by their Creator to turn away from doing that which they know is wrong. Therefore, to proceed with acquiring slaves and the wealth associated therewith, people had to find a justifiable reason. They did this by connecting a lie to the truth. The truth could be people are needed to perform strenuous labors such as work in mines, cultivate fields, or row ships. They used this truth to authorize the lie that due to their cultural superiority they had the right to acquire slaves, so thereby said harsh labors could be performed by a lesser people. In this way they took the truth and mingled it with the understandings of men. In this, it is to be recognized, one of the purposes of mercy is to allow an individual to escape feeling physical and or emotional pain. When people use a half-truth to justify sustaining a lie, the lie rewards them by administering corrupt mercy. For this hardening of their heart allows the lie to assuage the feelings associated with a guilty conscience, allowing them to take on the guise of being at peace with their conscience as they move forward in obtaining slaves. By this means, mercy/manhood is corrupted, and this opens the door by which womanhood is corrupted. For once people justify themselves in suppressing the rights of others, so thereby they might acquire slaves. It is then requisite they establish these 5 laws, so thereby they can force their slaves to work and generate wealth. These laws are: a slave must come when called, do the work they are called to do it where they are told, with the requisite effort and with the right attitude. Any slave who shows an attitude of malcontent, of not being willing to work as instructed, is subject to being controlled by a chain's iron grip, compelled to work via a leather whip's lashings. Via the power of these corrupt laws, slaves garnered great wealth for their masters. However, this led to an unanticipated consequence. Slave owners soon realized the wealth they're obtaining comes by the sweat and blood of those they're abusing. For by what their eyes see and ears hear, that truth is rendered self-evident. As it is so rendered, the pangs of a guilty conscience reawaken within them. Only this time they're not being counseled by their Creator in a firm but gentle manner as to why slavery is wrong. Now they are shown by their slaves' appealing and agonizing cries, that they may sustain the lie of their cultural superiority, endowing them with the right to rule over lesser peoples, and thereby escape the heightened pangs of a guilty conscience. It is requisite they harden their hearts to an even greater depth. When they so do, now that it has been made self-evident to them how brutal their slaves' lives are, they take this as a warning that when men are held to such work, this not only engenders malcontent, in due time it will instill a subversive attitude prone to rebellion. Thus, to protect themselves from said rebellion, they must forestall it via whatsoever tyrannical means are necessary. This causes them to enact these 5 additional laws of corruption. A slave shall not listen to whosoever they like, or believe whatsoever they like, shall not go where they like, nor work against their master by whatsoever means they like, shall not hold an attitude towards their master in whatsoever manner they like. For where the first 5 laws controlled slaves when they're at work, these control them when they're at rest. Thus, the first 5 are designed to function via physically abusing those that do not work hard enough, thereby stimulating them to work harder. But these latter 5 do not function by means of drawing blood via a whip's lashing, so thereby a slave will work as directed. Their purpose is to instill a sense of horror by administering a painful death. So via said laws, all slaves learn how serious the punishment is if they are found conspiring in any way against their master. How then are open marriages the living embodiment of this corrupt doctrine? When, for the sake of financial gain, a married couple sustained ancient slavery, this act always came at a set price, their capacity to become the living embodiment of the doctrine of freedom. For to the degree they hardened their hearts in order to sustain the lie of their cultural superiority, they became the living embodiment of said lie. For via the wealth they garner, such always seek to establish themselves as the elect within a society by acquiring positions of authority, so thereby they can have the state function via laws of oppression and tyranny. Look to achieve these goals by operating in close conjunction with their fellow slave owners and other like-minded peoples. For as they gain said positions, they would install their cohorts into sustaining positions of authority. Yet these acts of blatant nepotism could not be openly displayed. To do so meant running the risk of generating ill will towards them from the general populace. Thus, to obtain the positions of authority they desire, they function via secret societies. How, though, did a couple gain admittance into such a society? You and your spouse did so via a couple who were already members thereof, inviting you into an intimate association with them. This couple functioned as your guarantors, confirming you held the capacity to adhere unto the rules of the secret society to which they belong, did so by you proving to them that dictates of your conscience will not inhibit you from fulfilling the oath of fidelity you must uphold as a member of said society. How did you prove you were not inhibited by the dictates of your conscience? You did so by wife swapping, as via this means you as a couple proved you held the capacity to exchange your oath of fidelity towards one another for an oath of fidelity to the society and its corrupt rulers. By this means you gained access to the wealth and power that comes by being part of the ruling elite. By this means you function before the general populace as a happily married couple, while entering into discreet extramarital affairs your spouse approved of and partook in. Why did ancient slavery function via said marriages? Why did these 2 corrupted forms of manhood, mercy, of corrupted womanhood, justice, function via this manner? It was because slave owners had one real law of justice they had to fulfill. They had to provide their slaves with clothing, food, and shelter. It may have been of the most minimal nature, but in the vast majority of instances it was requisite they did so. Via the need to fulfill this one act, corrupted mercy remained tethered to corrupted justice. The living embodiment of this was, though said couples may have long since lost any real tender regard for one another, they had to remain married. They could engage in sexual liaisons so long as they transpired via discretion. so thereby they could maintain the appropriate appearance before the general public. This facade of being happily married was a replica of the false relationship slave owners said existed between them and their slaves, as the brutal nature of slavery also transpired void of unwanted witnesses. This replicating easily transpired, as those who sustained slavery had already hardened their hearts against the dictates of their conscience to a degree that allowed them to partake in said affairs void of feeling any guilt of conscience. They justified their not feeling any guilt of conscience by telling themselves the forms of morality that applied to common people did not apply to them, for as a class they were an elect group. This attitude of self righteousness not only endowed them with the belief that they had the right and responsibility to own slaves, it soon caused them to believe they also had the right and responsibility to rule over those they deemed as their far less mature fellow citizens. For they held to the belief if they allowed themselves to be ruled over by commoners, it would not only lead to their honor being besmirched, it would eventually lead to the collapse of the economic system by which their society prospers. For via their immaturity, commoners would end up adhering unto the outdated and foolish dictates of their conscience, and thereby end the right of any within their society to own slaves. Slave owners, in their determination to present and maintain themselves as their culture's elite, and therefore as those who are predestined to maintain it, function by means of that subtlety associated with pomp and ceremony. As by said subtlety they established their standing as the authorized guardians of their culture, allowing them to establish laws that suppress the rights of any to disagree with them in regards to how their culture should function. 2. If any broke said laws, act with a tyrannical hand in suppressing what they would label as an act of rebellion. This need to function via pomp and ceremony meant slave owners could not soil their hands by directly ruling over their slaves. Thus, it was requisite they hire taskmasters, men that via acts of overt brutality instilled obedience, while they, as their society's cultural elite, ruled by means of pomp and ceremony, the iron hand sheathed within a silken glove. For these reasons, wife swapping cannot be licensed under America's Declaration of Independence, as those who partake thereof harden their hearts to that depth whereby they can function via that subtlety of the lie associated with ancient slavery, in that they can instill the laws of oppression and of tyranny associated with slavery and feel no qualms in so doing.